Alrighty, guys, say what you will about the state of the MCU, but as we speak, Avengers Doomsday, that was a Freudian slip if I've ever seen one. Avengers Doomsday, one of the biggest and perhaps riskiest films that the MCU has ever done, especially given the precarious nature of everything going on with the MCU and how nothing's been going super swell for them. I mean, Daredevil Born Again is a big win. I think Captain America Brave New World, not as much. So, they haven't had that unmitigated streak of winning in a long while. But Avengers Doomsday represents what they're hoping will be the answer to get them back on track. And as we speak, Avengers Doomsday is either deep into pre-production, in fact, getting ready to film, or is filming. However, we don't know a whole lot about the story. In fact, it's interesting because we know very little about what this movie is going to be about. And that's honestly fine. I don't think we need to know with the movie being a year away. I think it's totally fine that we don't know. But the movie, I'm sure we'll get some more details and hear what the movie's story, right? Because we know Doctor Doom and we know the characters that are going to be in there, but we just don't know what's going to happen around it. But Anthony Mackie has decided to give us, I think, the most explicit information that we have had thus far in terms of what we can expect from the story of Avengers Doomsday. And it's interesting because I think that there are a couple of things that we might have guessed, and then there are other things that make me question, is that really the case? Or, what's going on here? So, this is what Anthony Mackie had to say in an exclusive interview with Collider, when he talked about the fact that they were the interviewer was comparing Avengers Doomsday to Avengers Infinity War and asking, well, is it going to be, similar in that regard? And Anthony Mackie said this. He said, quote, "You know what? I was really excited, man. It's one of those stories that really pushes the boundaries, and the cliffhanger at the end, the last moments of the film, it really builds and sets us up in a way for the continuation of the Marvel saga, which is really exciting." And I believe this quote was in direct answer to a question about reading the script for Avengers Doomsday. So that's one thing. But let's get to the other quote before we move on to our analysis and our thoughts. He says, quote, "You see these characters and you see how they're introduced and how they play in the universe moving forward, and no one is safe. Everyone is expendable." Okay. So some really interesting comments. Let's start out with the first one here. He's saying that Avengers Doomsday is going to have a cliffhanger. Now, that's something that we could have all guessed, right? If Avengers Doomsday ends and everyone's happy, it's like, the end of the first Avengers and they have shawarma and whatnot, even if it's like the end of Avengers Age of Ultron, where they're not, they've won and they're kind of suspecting some things are going on. I mean, I could see that, but more likely than not, especially because this is following the same release schedule of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame releasing a year apart. It was pretty clear. I think one of the biggest givens for Avengers Doomsday was that it was probably going to end, maybe not on an explicit loss, but the status quo was going to be very much changed in the MCU, and there was going to be some kind of cliffhanger. So I think that one's fairly obvious, and I think that, by him foreshadowing it, I don't think anyone had to say that for us to expect that a year in advance. I don't know. Maybe that was a little early for him to say that, but he says it pushes the boundaries. And the interesting thing about this quote in particular is that it really builds and sets us up for a way for the continuation of the Marvel saga. And that to me is more important because we've gotten quotes from the Russo brothers recently where they've said Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars are not an ending to the MCU, but rather a beginning. And the more I've thought about this, the more I'm beginning to view these two films as a transitionary set of films rather than a culmination, right? I mean, of course, you're going to have a ton of characters in there. But I think that truly, would it have been nice to have, the transition be as smooth as possible so that we could have another culmination right now? Sure. But I think it took a while, COVID and writer strikes and quality controls and Disney infighting. And we've gotten to the point now where I think we're finally getting to that transition point of the MCU. Is it too little, too late? I don't know. But I do think that that's what Anthony Mackie is alluding to, that this is going to be a transitionary point to push us to the next really exciting phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that that's exciting. That's exciting. And then, to get to his second quotes here, he says, "No one is safe. Everyone is expendable." Now, he might just be saying that, right? He might just be saying, oh, better watch out because Dr. Doom's coming after you. Or he might have legitimately read the script and seen a lot of characters dying that's unexpected. And he might be really trying to foreshadow that, yeah, there are going to be some characters that unexpectedly die. Maybe it's some of the OG Avengers. Maybe none of them make it out. Maybe Hulk, Thor, and Hawkeye, none of them make it out of the multiverse saga. I mean, they've lasted through basically from the start of the MCU. Maybe their time is over. Who knows, right? I wonder about this, right? Because he says no one is safe. I would suspect that he's pretty safe, right? Because I don't know if you'd want to kill off your new Captain America just like that after building up for a TV show and a movie. That seems a little weird to me. But I do think it's an interesting thing to hear that nobody is safe. And I think we've heard before that there is going to be no sort of dusting, snapping back into existence. There are going to be some real deaths. I also wonder if this is a subtle way, not to say that the Russos are just going to kill off every character that Marvel doesn't want to use in the future. I don't think that's true. I think that would be a little weird if they did that. But I do wonder if this is going to be an opportunity to reset the amount of characters that we're following in the MCU moving forward. It could be, maybe, but I don't know. That feels a little callous to me, and we'll have to see how they handle that. So I think some really interesting quotes here from Anthony Mackie on the state of the future of the MCU and where we're going with Avengers Doomsday. I think that these two films more and more to me are revealing that these are going to be the bridge films to whatever comes next, mutants, cosmic, whatever that might be. So guys, what do you think of the comments that Anthony Mackie has made about Avengers Doomsday after reading the script? Let me know in the comments down below.